Well, everybody, welcome back to the Complete Student Podcast. We are excited to bring you another great conversation today. Again, my name is Jay. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jackson Norton. How are you doing, Jackson?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here. This is yet another very exciting episode.
Yes, I love it. And we've got a really great topic. I think a really culturally relevant topic today, and I'm excited to just kind of share some thoughts about it and to just have this discussion with you. So can you tell us again what we are talking about today?
Yeah, so today we're talking about deconstruction. I think most people who have been around church for a few years know at least one person who is deconstructed at some point. Personally, I have a lot of friends who have gone through the process of deconstruction, some who have reconstructed and some who haven't. And maybe if you're listening, you're not really familiar with the term deconstruction. It means to analyze and question aspects of Christian culture. And it seems like this is a cultural wave right now. We're seeing Christians all over the world go through this process. And really the last thing that I want to see is for them to go through it alone. I think it would be great if we could explore how to react to this process and engage with the movement. See, we're never meant to be consumers of culture. I think God designed us to create culture. So that's why I want to ask, Jay, what was your initial reaction to this surge of Christians speaking up about their deconstruction?
Yeah. I'll just add a little bit to sort of the definition that you gave of deconstruction. I think it's also, in some ways, just reevaluating or kind of just taking apart maybe some of the cultural ideas and thoughts that you grew up with and like putting them under a microscope, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of it has to do with like how I was raised and the faith that I was raised in and how it was portrayed to me, and then really taking a moment to step back and say, okay, if I'm looking at my faith for me, like not what other people have told me, but just kind of what I am seeing for myself, how does that really play out in my life? So I think that that's important just to understand what that looks like what people are doing in this process, this mental exercise that a lot of people are going through. I think is important to be able to really define well, what is it that we're trying to accomplish if we're going to go through the process of deconstructing our faith, right? So my initial reactions is that I feel for a lot of people who are going through this. I think anytime you see someone, whether it's a friend or a loved one, a family member, whoever it might be, whenever you see someone going through this process of them saying, hey, I'm deconstructing my faith, I think it's tough to see people go through sort of this faith crisis, and it feels a bit like a crisis for a lot of people who are like, I don't know what I believe. I don't know how my faith plays out in the world around me, how I'm supposed to live it out in the most genuine, authentic way. I think it can be sad to see, but at the same time, I'm also really excited for it. I think it's healthy that people really take time to think about their faith for themselves and what it means for them personally, and not to just inherit your parents' faith or inherit someone else's faith, your pastor's faith, because I think what happens a lot of times is, and what we see a lot of times happening is that people who haven't owned their faith for themselves and have just listened to the faith of other people around them, when they see those other people act in a contradictory way to how they perceive their faith to be played out, I think a lot of times it's a little earth-shattering, and it rocks them to their core of like, hey, I didn't think that this was what we were supposed to be about, and they end up putting their faith in the people rather than putting their faith in maybe the God that they choose to believe in. Yeah. So what are some of your initial thoughts, reactions, as you've seen, as you mentioned, some of your own friends go through the same process?
Yeah, so I think something that I was really excited about, and maybe it's just the encourager in me, the optimist, is that I saw this is a great opportunity for people to actually think critically about their faith. Mm-hmm. I remember in high school, all of my friends, it seemed impossible to get them to think about their faith. I mean, we wanted to talk about anything but our religion. Right. And for that deconstruction process to start up and for them to begin to think about, what do I believe? That was almost the first time I had seen them get excited and passionate and interested in what they believed. For a lot of people, especially who are raised in the church, they just have these beliefs, and it's almost inherent, almost default. And for people to be able to say, okay, for me, what do I believe? That's more interest than I usually see in faith. And so I love to see that. I think the best understanding that I've found of deconstruction, and the best way that I've been able to go at it as I've, reacted, is this understanding of this analogy of my old Toyota Solara. It's bear with me because I think it works. But I remember a few years ago I was dirt broke, and the only car that I could afford was this rundown, beat up Toyota Solara.
How much has changed between now and then?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, I drive a Subaru, but now I'm broke again.
Okay, cool.
So I bought this Toyota Solara, and there were so many problems with it. There were so many things that I just inherited when I bought the car that were given from the previous owner, the guy who had it last. And the radiator didn't work, and there were, valves broken. And what we ended up having to do is take the engine apart completely, deconstruct the whole thing, find the pieces that weren't working, find the pieces that were broken, and replace them with the new working pieces. Yeah. And I almost see our faith as that Toyota Solara, to risk being sacrilegious in this moment. Yeah. I think the best thing that you can do for your faith is not just inherit it from another person and let the broken pieces and what worked for them work for you, but find out what's in here that I don't see as working. What's in here that doesn't, line up with my understanding of faith? What here doesn't line up with the Bible or what I hear from God? Yeah. And so, you maybe take out that radiator and you replace it with a new one. You fix the valves and you find yourself with an engine that runs well, that works and strengthens your faith by the process of deconstructing and reconstructing it with better pieces.
I have a couple thoughts about that. First one is superficial, but how long did that car last you after that?
Well, that's where the analogy ends. I took it on a 4-hour trip to Genoa, Nebraska, and that was the death sentence. Yeah. I probably spent less than 6 months in that car.
Yeah, so hopefully with our faith we do a better job of reconstructing it than you did with that Toyota. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about, when you were a teenager or when you were younger, and you noticed that a lot of people just didn't want to go through the mental exercise of really talking about their faith or thinking it through for themselves. I think that what I'm seeing, having been in working with students for a really long time, is that students are really starting to do this sooner and sooner nowadays than they did back then. I think there's been enough things that have happened within our culture, and there's been enough wave of just cultural moments that have caused people at a younger age to say, let me reevaluate what I believe, what I've been taught, and let me think it through for myself. So I think that's, again, like you said, I think it's been really healthy. And it's, I think, also really scary for a lot of people, especially parents, church leaders, or, anyone who's spent time trying to invest, teach, train up children in the way they should go. It becomes almost this really scary thing because you're like, wait. I feel like I've tried to put my best effort into teaching you the right things. And sometimes we still obviously get it wrong, and there's still things that we need to reevaluate. But it can be scary for those who are in positions of leadership or authority to see younger people deconstructing their faith or asking questions that are tough questions for themselves. But I think it's a healthy process that we should go through.
Yeah. And I think almost that fear isn't necessarily unhealthy. Obviously, we don't want to live with fear, but the idea that I see someone in my life who previously I had this confidence I could see them in heaven, and now I see this wrinkle of doubt that in my mind spirals and could lead to them dropping their faith altogether. The genuine desire in my heart is just to see them in heaven. And obviously now there's this unhealthy exaggeration of, well, what if they don't believe at all? Yeah. But if you've seen it happen before, and I have, there's almost this sense of, I don't want them to lose this amazing faith that we have. Yeah. And so it's coming from a healthy, genuine place, but that fear, if it takes over, it can, monopolize your approach in your mind, and it becomes a real mess. Yeah. So I want to ask, because this is so important to do in a healthy way and to have the right approach, if I'm going to go about deconstruction for myself, how should I do that?
Yeah. One of the first things that comes to my mind, something I've just been thinking about recently as it relates to this topic, is understand what it is that you're actually wanting to do, and what are the pieces that you're really wanting to put under the microscope and reevaluate. I think what has happened for a lot of individuals, and I'm not saying this is the case for everybody. In fact, I would say that in particular, this is more of the problem for evangelical Christians than maybe more mainline Christians or Catholics or whatever. But I think one of the things that has happened is that we've rather than deconstruct our faith, we've actually come to a place of wanting to disassociate from certain parts of our faith. It's like we're not actually looking at the core of our faith and saying, am I questioning whether or not God made me, or I'm a sinful person, or Jesus' sacrifice was once and for all? Like, I don't know if I have seen tons of examples. There are tons of examples of people questioning the faith to the core, as much as people looking at the way that our faith has been portrayed and culture around us and saying, I don't want to be a part of that, right? Like, I'm seeing what the stereotype is for someone who's called this type of Christian, whether it's a white evangelical Christian or whatever it might be. You're seeing the stereotype in front of you and you're going, I don't want to associate with that part of it. And so I think a lot of what people are doing is disassociating rather than deconstructing. I think if you are going to truly deconstruct, then it's like, okay, what are the goals? Asking yourself, what are the goals that I'm trying to accomplish? Like, there's things about the Bible, there's things that I've read that I'm really wrestling with, and I don't know the answer to them. And I would say that in that case, like, be willing to actually do some hard work of studying and looking for answers to questions that you have, because I believe that the answers are out there, but it takes a lot of hard work. Like, if you're really going to dive deep into the scriptures and what we believe and why we believe what we believe and all of these things, the creation story and all of these things, like, you got to take time to really study that, and it's not going to probably happen very quickly. And so if you're really truly wanting to go through the exercise of deconstructing and forming well-formed, thoughtful opinions or beliefs that you hold for yourself, then it's going to take some work. And I think a lot of times what happens is that we aren't willing to do the work that it takes to really find the answers that we're looking for. And we want to just like say, well, I don't believe this anymore, and this doesn't ring true for me, or there's so much about this that I don't understand and doesn't make sense to me. And we just leave it at that, and it becomes this one-way conversation where like nobody can speak into it, or you're not willing to just like do the research and find what other voices have said, how other people have tried to answer those questions. I think that a lot of those things happen. So I think being willing to like take those doubts to God, trusting that God is in that process with you, that he's not scared of your doubts, that he's not worried that somehow you're going to mistake his character for something that it's not. I think God is bigger than that, and he knows who he is. He's pretty confident in that, I think. And so like, don't be afraid to bring those doubts to God, to really wrestle those questions out, and to just allow yourself to go through a real mental exercise of like, let me find the answers truly that I'm looking for, not just deconstruct and not work at trying to reconstruct a faith in the aftermath.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If I can respond to that, I think that the idea of this picture of like, you know, a white male evangelical as sort of the centerpiece of our faith, and people say, man, I don't want to associate with that. Maybe it's I don't identify with that. Maybe that doesn't represent me. That isn't a representation of what I bring to the faith. And I think maybe part of the core problem of how we can help people be more engaged with Christianity is, instead of putting up that centerpiece, that face, put up a more clear picture of our belief. Because I think the big issue that I've heard in church is that, you know, we preach unity and then we call people to uniformity, and they're different. Unity is the unison of a core belief. And uniformity is we all have to look the same, feel the same, act the same, and we all have to believe the same details. And, you know, I know people that don't believe in speaking in tongues. I personally do. We still believe in Jesus. We still believe in the Trinity. We still believe in all that. And I think we get so hung up on the small little things of like, yeah, well, he has tattoos and piercings. It's like, well, who cares? We still believe in Jesus, right? And I think people see that call to uniformity, and it puts them off. And they're like, okay, well, I don't like that. What else don't I like? Right. And it can put them in a place of dissociating everything, because we've given them this picture that's not really an accurate picture of our faith, but it's just this centerpiece of, well, we all look like this and we all dress like this and talk like this. And it almost breeds unhealthy deconstruction.
Right. I would almost put in there that along with sort of that looking at the core values of what we believe, I think is also like taking a look at Jesus and the characteristics that he represents in the scriptures. I think in Colossians 3, I believe it talks about how God essentially is embodies human form in Jesus. So everything that we can know about everything that we can know about God, we can find in Jesus. So what is the way, the core things that we see in Jesus, like his character, right? Those character attributes, and saying, okay, if this is a character of who Jesus is, how does that portray, like how do you live that out? Or what are some things that I'm seeing and the way that people are portraying our faith that don't seem to match what I think the character of Jesus is, and really like doing that deep dive and trying to figure out the character of God, like what are those characteristics of who he is.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think there's work to be done on both sides. So I want to ask, I mean, like, if I'm going through deconstruction and I have, this process ahead of me, what's the best way that I can go about that? And I think for me, if I was to have a friend bring that question to me, I would say, don't go alone. It's good that you've reached out. Have a core group of people. Have accountability in this. If I go to my 3 guys and I say, hey, this is what's going on. I'm feeling this. I'm going through this. They can check up on me. They can help me through the process. Maybe a couple of them have been through the process. Yeah. And we can work through it together. And I think any process that you go through, especially going about your faith, you don't want to do it alone. I don't think Jesus designed us to be alone. Yeah. God made Adam, and he said, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make him a partner. We're designed to live and thrive within community. I would also say remain open-minded. As much as you can, believe what you believe and find the tenets of your faith that are consistent. But also, really, if you're deconstructing, find out what's off limits. I mean, if you're going to the scriptures and you're doing the research, really nothing is safe from being questioned. Because I believe that the core tenets of your faith will be reinforced if you do the research. Right. So lay everything out. Don't put one thing away, because maybe you'll have to go through deconstruction again if you do that. And the best way to go about the process is remain open-minded. Say, yeah, I know that I've been taught this since I was a kid, but let's analyze it. Remain open-minded. And one thing that I do with almost everything is I track my progress. Write down your thoughts, write down your feelings, especially with something like this where the thoughts can be so abstract. It helps to make them concrete by writing them down, by putting them somewhere in your phone, in a notepad. Make sure somewhere you have those thoughts where you can go back and be like, oh yeah, well, I did learn that about what I believe about the Holy Spirit. Or like, you know what, I think that area of Christian culture isn't really for me. And you can see it happen, and you can track your process and watch the process. Because if I'm in a place where I've been deconstructing for like 3 months and I'm just discouraged, I can go back and be like, oh wow, well look at all that clarity I found in this time. I can be encouraged to continue the process instead of being stuck in this depressive state of, oh, this is so intimidating.
Right. No, I think those are really, really good thoughts, and I think that's a good process to go through. You talked about sort of not doing this process alone, but walking with other people through it. I think that's so healthy, whether you're deconstructing or not, to really like learn scripture, like just look at it with a group of friends and study scriptures together, and ask each other thoughts on different passages or things that you're reading. But let me ask you this: is there anything else that you would advise if you've got a friend who's going through deconstruction? How else would you want to help support a friend who's deconstructing?
I would just reiterate what I said before. It applies both stepping away and stepping into deconstruction. If you have a friend who's deconstructing, don't let them go in alone. They were meant to thrive with you by their side. And another thing, to empathize with someone in that situation, if you've been in the church for a while and you're starting to question things, there's so much shame associated with that. There's like, well, I don't want people to know I'm questioning. They're going to think I'm losing my faith. Right. And so if you're able to be there for them and say, it's okay, there's no shame here, there's no condemnation, we're friends, we can talk about this openly, being an ally to them in that is really, really important. I would say also remain open-minded. When someone says, you know what, I'm really questioning when I believe in this thing, and you're like, well, you're questioning that? It's dangerous, because then you're reinforcing that shame. Yeah. So remain open-minded, because they've taken the time to be open-minded too. They've really peeled back the layers themselves. So doing that work for yourself as their friend is really important. And then I would say just continue to be a friend. You were a friend with them when they believed and they weren't questioning. Be a friend now as they're struggling to believe and they're questioning. Remain friendly. Remain that person that they got to know and why they trust you with this now. Yeah. I think it's so dangerous to let that change your dynamic in your friendship just because they're questioning. I've done it before, and it's been cataclysmic. It's been catastrophic. It's affected relationships, ones that I've had to put in the work to rebuild at this point because people in my life were questioning things, and that intimidated me, and I reacted poorly. But if you can be consistent and remain that friend, be a person they can rely on, a person they can lean on, just as the way you were before, that can really help things.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is really good, and I think you're really pointing to the heart of what I would say is empathetic listening, of really just sitting down with someone and like being willing to have the conversation, to reiterate some of their concerns back to them so that they know that you're understanding what you're saying to them, and just really being willing to have those conversations, like you said, like don't have to have the answers, right? Yeah. You don't have to say, well, you're questioning this. Let me tell you what it's supposed to be, right? Like don't come at it with all the answers. Just like let them go through that process. And I think a lot of times when I mentioned it earlier, but like a lot of times it becomes a one-way conversation, right? So if you're telling me, hey, I'm really struggling with this part of my faith, and I just come straight back at you with like answers, and you're like, I don't want to hear that, right? Yeah. Then it feels like a one-way conversation. If I could take the time to like listen to you, to just be empathetic to where you're at in the process, and over time, like allow you to ask me maybe what my thoughts are, rather than just trying to like, hey, let me just tell you what I think, and I think that your questioning of this is dumb, and like this is the answer. This is what you should be believing. I don't know why you're going through this process. Like no one's going to receive that very well. Very few people are going to receive that well. So being willing to like just be empathetic, sit with them through the process, and then if it's appropriate, or if you feel like the time is right, like, and maybe you're going through some of these same mental exercises, maybe you have some of the same questions, being willing to share resources when you have the opportunity to. Like there's some great resources out there, and if you're someone who's been exploring some of these same questions and tensions, and you found something that was helpful, like, hey, I really liked this is really something that helped bring a lot of clarity for me, let me share this with you. I think people are more open to that. Just be empathetic.
Yeah, I think if I am deconstructing my faith and everything within my belief system is changing, what could be so comforting is a familiar face in a friend. And if I go to them and my friend has changed too, that's going to be so defeating. I want some sense of normalcy in this change and this really troubling time. And so to be that comforting voice that is just there to listen and there to be empathetic, that can go a long way. Yeah. And just talking about listening and being empathetic and our reaction, I want to ask, what's our role in this movement? If we see this new wave of deconstruction, how can we as believers react and play a part in this?
Yeah, I would say that for a lot of people that are going through this process, like a lot of people feel like they're not allowed or they're not supposed to have doubt. Like there's like you mentioned, there's shame sometimes that can come with like, oh, I'm doubting this, I'm questioning this, what are other people going to think? So a lot of people don't choose to go through the process because they're like, there's too much shame in going through this. And I think when that breaks down, when something happens that like rocks your world, and you're like face to face with what is it that I believe at my core about my faith. And when those moments come, if you haven't taken the time to really dig deep, like those can be really challenging moments. So I think when we take the time to embrace our doubts, we bring them before God, like let's not just leave it at a deconstruction. Let's challenge others, challenge ourselves to again reconstruct at some point, to find some well-formed opinions or beliefs that we can hold true, that we believe, and we can move forward in those beliefs. I think that's really important that we take the time to reconstruct as well. I go back to the story of doubting Thomas in the scriptures. Like I think that's maybe one of the best examples scripturally of someone deconstructing their faith. It's like, hey, I spent the last 3 years with this guy who said that he is going to like change the world, and now he's dead. Like, how does that work? How is that going to play out? And he had all these doubts, and he's starting to like I would say deconstruct. Like, okay, I thought that this was true, but I don't know if this is true anymore. I'm going to question this. And he brought those before God. And his friends, the other disciples were like, no, man, we saw him. He's good. Like, come on, believe with us. And he's like, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if I can believe it, right? So I think we have to also remember that, like, our faith is faith, right? Like, there's some things that we will not be able to see, but we've got to just come to a decision that we're going to believe anyways. And that's what faith is. It's not like I don't have to have faith that my phone is right here in front of me. Like, I can see it. There's no faith required, but you have to have an element of faith to believe in God and who he says he is and what he's come to do for each and every single one of us. So if you don't have a level of faith, then of course it's going to be hard to go through this process because you refuse to just like have that bit of faith.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think as my final thought, I have a confession and a clarification from earlier. I'm not a car guy, and I don't know how to take a car apart. So what really happened in that story is that my father and my brother who's a mechanic, took apart the car with me, and mostly I watched. But I think that if we have a role in the movement, it's to act as they did, to be there to help as an available resource. I think the last thing that the church can do in this moment is to just separate. And just to stand off and say, well, okay, you're on your own. You want to question things? You're on your own. That is so unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And so remembering, my brother and my father helping me tear that car apart and put the right pieces back in place, they didn't push me aside, but they were available there to help. And if we can just say, hey, yeah, if you need anything, we're here. Hey, if you have any questions, I'm here to listen. If we can just be available as a resource to help people, the church at large, that can be really, really helpful. Yeah. And I think that if we have a role in the movement, it's just to be, as Jesus was, available to people. Don't be too rushed. Don't be too into your own thing. Be willing to slow down enough to hear when people are asking questions, when people need some help.
And it wasn't that they just like gave you the solution and were like, Jackson, we're just going to buy you a new car. Yeah. Forget about going through this process. Let me just give you a new car. Like, we can't do that with people's faith. You can't just be like, here, let me just give you your faith, right? You
can't deconstruct
sit with
for
me,
them.
go for and you sit with me as I go through it, right? So, good analogy. I love the
Thank you.
analogy of the Toyota and the process that it took to get to where you are now with your Subaru.
That was such a painful process with that car. It's such a perfect analogy because it was really internally troubling.
And I assume that that's what a lot of people go through when they deconstruct their faith.
Exactly.
Oh, man. Well, thank you, Jackson, for sharing your thoughts and having this conversation with me. I think it was good to just talk this through. Hope you guys had an opportunity to engage in the conversation as well, that you enjoyed what we had to say. Maybe you have some of your own thoughts as well. Feel free to share those thoughts with us. We'd love to hear from you guys as well. And hopefully you guys can join us again for the next episode of the Complete Student Podcast. Thank you again for being here with us. Subscribe, share if you liked anything about this episode, and we hope to have you back for the next one. We'll see you guys later.